Hi, in this video I'm going to show you how to set up the wheel-powered space elevator. But before you start, you will need to edit the settings of your game, or create a game, with these settings in mind. You need to enable Share Inertia Tensor, and make sure that is toggled on. Okay, now that we've loaded in, I'd like to warn you about some of the associated risks with a particularly large grid like this. So firstly, having massive grids affects performance, so you might experience some stuttering when the game is loading the grid in. I can't really do anything about this, that's just the nature of large grids. Secondly, there is a physics limit on how large grids can get, and if they go beyond that limit, you might find that some blocks don't have collision anymore. You might have experienced this before, but you can imagine how catastrophic that might be for an elevator that suddenly is trying to drive along rails that no longer have any collision. There is a solution to the collision issue that we'll address later, but as a rule, I'd say when you're setting the height, the build height of the space elevator, you don't go beyond 11 kilometers. Thirdly, space engineers has some physics issues we all know about, and although it's rare, Clang does sometimes grace this particular contraption with its presence. Also, sometimes projections don't seem to print if they aren't within like a loaded range, if you know what I mean. So if there's no player nearby for the grid to be loaded in to memory. So it's occasionally worth checking, making sure that the printer heads are doing what they're supposed to be doing. And finally, I haven't tested it, but I think it might cause problems if the game mode allows for unsupported grids. All that being said, let's get started with the setup. So for reference, I'm going to name some of the parts of the elevator, like what is left, what is right, the control room, the elevator car, just so later on in the guide you'll know what I'm referring to. The left side is what I'm looking at right now, and this is the right side. It's not immediately evident, but you can see there is a control room attached to the left side of the elevator. The elevator car is this sort of octagon shape, and that's what drives up and down. The printer contraption is everything that's in dark green, and the printer head is basically what I'm looking at now, this sort of cube that goes around the rail. These center welders, therefore welding up the final beam for which the elevator car can connect to. But you'll see that later. So I think that's pretty much everything you'd need to know. So I think we should just get started. So you will experience different things whether you paste this blueprint or you weld it from a projection, if you print it, for example. So this the guide will sort of be more or less the same for the second half, but there is some setup if you don't have the subgrids built when you start. So by that I mean you can see these pistons are not connected to these piston heads. That's because there's a missing piston. So what the first thing we'll do is we'll remove these old piston heads. Let's stick a merge block here too, and here on the left and right side, and then we add a piston here, and we add a piston here. So we'll also need to attach a merge block, make sure it's attached to the piston head, and the same on this side. Okay, now let's start by changing the properties. So first thing I'll do is I'll search for piston. I'll make sure I can see hidden blocks. So the one I'm looking at now is on the left side of the rail. You can tell that because there's the control room. And this piston is called piston left 1. So this is the left piston head we're attaching. So if we go here and type left 2, so we have left 1 and left 2, and then we know that this one is obviously right 2. So if you search piston, you'll notice there's two groups. There's piston group left, piston group right, and these pistons that we've just added, they are not in those groups. So we should add them to the group, which you can do by selecting the group name and holding down control and clicking on piston left 2 in this case. And now these are both selected. You click save. Now the piston group name will disappear, but if you just cycle the show hidden blocks, it will reappear, and you can see both the pistons are selected when you select piston group left. Piston group right, let's do the same thing. We control, click, save, and then we can cycle. Just double check that it's showing. Yes, okay. Now what we'll need to do is we'll need to modify the settings of both of these pistons. You can do that at the same time like I am doing, or you can do it individually. If you want to do it at the same time, you just control click to select 2, and then we can get started. First thing you want to do, share an inertia tensor. Second thing, set the maximum distance to 9.8. You can do that by control clicking. Set the minimum distance to 1, and the max impulse on axis and non-axis is 100 kilonewtons on both, so just max out these. Okay, now we've done that, we can set the velocity to 2, and if you do it in the right order, everything should line up properly, and these merge blocks will connect. We can remove these. These merge blocks are green, so they are connected. We can remove them, and now we're in a position where it would be as if you pasted the blueprint in. If you're in a game mode where you would require components to build things, you can't print for free, which is survival, for example, you'll need a source of components. Now the elevator will stop if the components run out, or it doesn't think there's enough, and it will tell you what it requires on this screen here in the control room. But to enable this functionality, you first have to, if you go to a control panel and search for PB check resources, okay, and you toggle that on, then it will enable the usage of resources. So it will stop when you run out of resources, and it will start again when you have the resources available. So you don't necessarily need that if you're in a creative game. And you can connect the resources. I've actually added this block, but this is a conveyor. You can just connect a source of resources here, and I'll show you. Switch lock, and it's locked. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to detach the elevator car, but before we do that we have to reset the wheels. They've at the default offset, and this is so you can actually print them. So they're not touching the rails at the moment, but if we press this button, they are all set to touch the rails, and we can remove these red blocks. Now this is detached from the elevator base, so we can then go here and we can go to info and convert to ship. Now it's going to fall. There is a risk here that it's sometimes in Space Engineers, when you detach two large grids from one another, separate them into two separate grids, for a moment there won't be, the collision won't work correctly. So sometimes when you do this, it will just fall straight through the elevator base. It's really quite strange. So my advice would be to, before you do that, before you convert it to a ship, maybe save the game. But for the most part, it usually works. Then you click this to lock the elevator base to the elevator car. And now what we can do, fly it back up to the printer head. We can remove this red block and this red block. And now the printer heads, the elevator car and the elevator base are all separate grids. Some of the time. The printer heads do merge on, but for the most part they're separate grids. Now once you're ready, you go in here. If you want to define a build height, you type in BB check height. You go to edit. Now 11,000 meters. This is 11 kilometers. This is the maximum I'd advise using. You can go less than this, but you can change this to be whatever you want. Don't go over 11 kilometers though. So once you've set it to whatever you want, you can come to this button, press the button, and the elevator should start printing. While your elevator's printing, you might want to check on the progress. If you come down to the control room and enter here, you can see the percentage it has done, how long it will take to finish, or an estimated time. Okay, now we're at the top, we can start dismantling the printing contraption. So you have to be quite careful, because if something falls down, it falls 11 kilometers and hits the elevator base, or it hits the elevator. So just make sure you're, well actually I don't need a grinder, I'm creating creative, but just make sure you're removing things from the detached piston head first, and make sure you don't completely detach anything. You're just removing blocks. It's okay if some components fall, they don't do any damage. Okay, and almost lost one then. Okay, and basically what you want to do is work your way up. I can just remove the whole layer here, so makes it easier. Okay, and we'll just stop there with the well actually no we won't, we'll keep removing. We'll move all of this until we get to the middle. Okay, and then once we're at the middle, we should start removing this center area. These welders in the middle. Okay, do it carefully. I just made a mistake, and that would have been pretty catastrophic. So don't make the mistakes I make. Just make sure you remove everything carefully. Don't detach any blocks and allow them to fall, just remove them sequentially and carefully. If you're doing this with a grinder, it can be more risky because you can't necessarily grind down blocks as they're falling. It's too difficult to do. So once we've bunch of components falling. Okay, and once we get to the other printer head, we can just remove from the top down. Making sure you don't do that and detach blocks. Okay, and we continue that methodology here until we have essentially this, and then we want to go down again and start removing from the welders and grinders at the bottom. Okay, and we can remove these red blocks on the top here. Okay, so now if you want to continue building up, you will have to skip forwards a little bit, but if you're happy with 11 kilometers, or if you have built another sort of, I guess, another subgrid of rails above this, you'll get to this point and you'll want to start welding up the station. So to do that, first you'll notice that there are some blocks that are in the way of the projection, so you'll need to remove the top layer here and weld that up. You can see sort of the ghost of the projection. So here we can see another one. Okay, we're good there. We need to remove these. I guess you don't necessarily need to remove these, but if you want the station, then this is what you have to do. You have to start with the bits that are intersecting, like this. There are a few connection points along the rail, like here. We need to remove that and you can weld it up. I think there's another one down here. Yeah. Okay. Oh, there's another one. These aren't absolutely essential, but it just allows the station to be connected to the rail, so you can transport items and resources, ores, between the ground and the station without having to use the elevator. Okay. Okay, once that's done, everything else is just manual welding. There's no tricks or anything to it, so I'll just skip to a completed station. Okay, that's completely welded up now. You can see that there are plenty of connectors and places to land. There's a bar on either side. There are 4 repair bays, and there's lots of storage on here. So I hope it serves your game well. If you would like to extend the elevator to beyond 11 kilometers, all you need to do is use the self-building space elevator extension, which is uploaded to the workshop, and you can basically just tack that on the top. If you wait, I will show you how to do that. Otherwise, enjoy the build. One thing you might want to do once you've finished welding the space station is map each of the transit buttons. Here we have one of the transit buttons. If we go to a control panel and find the transit buttons, there's many of them. Some of them will be mapped to missing blocks basically. So you just need to map them to this timer block and trigger now. That one's fine. That one's fine as well. That one's fine. This one is missing. Okay, so there should be 4 that are missing. So once you have mapped those, these should all work. So when you press this button, it will trigger the elevator to go down. Okay, we'll start by placing a rotor here. I'm going to use an advanced rotor. I use build vision, but you can do this from a terminal. You just go to the rotor, you turn on rotor lock, and you turn on share inertia tensor. Okay, and then from there, stick a conveyor on top, and we can start by building a little bit of rail to connect these two. Okay, and from there, what we can do is build out this way, add a connector. The reason why I'm adding a connector and not a rotor head is because connector lock generally tends to be a lot more stable than rotor lock. Before we do that, actually, let's just adjust the offset, the height offset, the rotor displacement rather. So if I'll do this in a terminal just so you can see. Rotor, advanced rotor. Let's set the displacement to 0.01, and then we can add this connector. We can switch the lock. Okay. So what I would also do, well, first let's remove this rotor head as we no longer need it. Remove that and remove that. Okay, and we lock those. So I think just to be safe, let's find the connectors here. We find this one, and I rename this one to null. And remove used for parking and turn strength down. Strength isn't that important, but because it's always going to be stuck. Same for this one. Rename it to null. Used for parking. Strength. Okay, and this one we rename it to null. The reason why I name it to null is just so I know don't mess with this. That's sort of my way of telling myself don't disconnect this, don't ever play with this, leave this how it is. So we rename it to null, use for parking off, okay, and so now if I just search null, I'll see these 4 connectors, and I will hide them from all menus because I never want to see them again, and we can build up this excuse me, we can build up this little tiny piece of rail. I'd say leave them connected for now until we have the build mechanism placed on top. So now these are connected and one grid, we can place the projector. So stick a projector where you want it, and then select a blueprint. It's going to be the self-building space elevator extension. It's going to warn you about multi-grids, but that's fine. So we want to rotate -90. We'll skip forwards to it being completely welded. Okay, now that's welded up, it's similar to before. If you're in creative or you're an admin, you can just paste this on top and you don't need to do all that projector business. But if you're welding it up, you will have to replace these pistons like we did earlier, and rename them. So this is piston right 2, and if I just search piston, see piston left 2, show hidden blocks, piston left, add that to that group, add that to that group. Okay, and it's the same settings as before. So we start with the max distance 9.8, minimum distance is 1, max out the impulse, share inertia tensor, and mustn't forget to add these merge blocks. Oh. Okay, and we set the velocity to 2. They extend and they'll connect. Oh, you must be careful to not do what I just did. Make sure you remove these piston heads. Okay, and we can reverse it again. Okay, once they've merged, remove the merge blocks. Remove these red blocks, disconnecting the printer heads. We'll need to switch on the check height if we're using resources. We're in creative, so we don't need to. Oh, sorry. Check height needs to be on. Check resources is on only if you are requiring resources. So then we can edit the printing distance. So by default it's 11 kilometers. If you print this on top of your existing 11 kilometers, your total elevator height will be 22 kilometers. So I just want to go up to 20 kilometers, which is fine. So I'll change that to 9,000 meters. Once that's done, I press this button and it starts printing. So the next thing you want to do is send the elevator down. So we can just press this button to send it back down. Okay, so now it's detached, we can start removing this beam here. And we can remove this other temporary beam that we made here. Okay, and now, so this ring of conveyors, you will need to leave that. When it's finished printing, you can replace the conveyors. Until then, these two rails need to be the same grid, so just leave that there for now. And we'll skip forward to when it's completed. Okay, now it's finished building the second segment, much the same as before. You can remove this printer contraption. As I'm in creative, I'm not going to go to the effort of doing the whole grinding down thing block by block. I'm just going to delete it. You weld up the space station the same way as before, and now that it's finished, we can actually go to the halfway point, which is here. We can remove all of these blocks. Ugh. You can leave that as is. One other thing you will need to do is go to one of the control panels, and we'll need to regenerate the floors. So we look for the elevator script, which is here, and we run generate, and now we can transition to the space station. So as you can see, 20 kilometers is pretty far. You're not going to have many issues at that distance, so you know, have fun and leave a good review.